Hi everyone, it's Thuan here. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. A few days ago, my sister showed me a post on social media. This woman was very poor, so yogurt was a luxury for her. Her greatest joy in life now was opening the fridge and seeing lots of yogurt inside, which made her feel incredibly happy. When I read those lines, I suddenly felt a wave of emotion, everyone. So, today's podcast, I want to talk about money. About 2, 3, or 4 years ago, I did a podcast about money, but that episode had some copyrighted music, so I think it's been removed from all platforms. Most likely, you haven't heard it. Since that podcast episode until now, I've experienced so many changes, truly spectacular changes. That's why I want to make a new podcast about money. Before we dive into the main podcast, I want to make a few small notes. First, this podcast will discuss my thoughts on money and how those thoughts influenced my actions from when I was a child until I grew up. It's entirely my personal story and experience. Others might not be like me, and I'm not rich or successful now, or anything that would give me a lesson like, hey, everyone, follow me, and we'll all become billionaires. No, not at all. This is simply a story to listen to for enjoyment. There are no life lessons here, just that. Secondly, when I tell a story about myself, something that shaped my mindset and way of thinking, I want to tell it from beginning to end, starting from when I was a child. Some of these stories you might have heard before, but I still want to tell them again to create a coherent narrative that's easy for everyone to follow. So, it might be long. Today's episode might be very long. The third point is that I grew up always feeling poor. I want to emphasize that feeling poor and being genuinely poor are two completely different concepts. If you want to know what being genuinely poor means, you can look up the definition on Google. It'll give you a few definitions. It might mean being on the poverty line, facing extreme hardship, or unable to meet basic life necessities. My family wasn't like that, but I still felt poor. Someone could have $1 billion in their hand and still feel poor because they live surrounded by people with $10 billion. That feeling doesn't represent the reality of what's happening. But at the same time, those things I felt also shaped who I am. Because human suffering doesn't stem from actual problems, but from how we feel and perceive those problems. I know how lucky I was, given my starting point, to have the best support system my family could provide, allowing me to pursue my education fully. But back to feeling poor, it just means feeling that way, and you can't make a tiny child understand you're not as poor as you think, or stop thinking nonsense, because it's too late. It has already deeply formed within me, so with that, let's begin. My family lived in a small town in the south, but about 20 or 30 years ago, it was like living in the forest, 2 kilometers from the Central Highlands. It was surrounded by dense trees, no residential houses around. So, the families who moved there were usually young couples starting from scratch with nothing. You could say I lived in a poor neighborhood. Later, our neighborhood wasn't poor anymore, but at that time, it was. Back then, the women in our neighborhood often came to our house to confide in my mother. When I was little, I didn't understand why my mother had such a captivating presence, why everyone sought her out to share their secrets. But later, when I grew up and also faced problems that I discussed with my mother and found relief, I realized, wow, my mom truly is a born therapist. My mother had an incredible ability to listen, an amazing ability to alleviate stress. When people came to confide, my mother would make me go into my room to practice calligraphy, to make my handwriting beautiful, and also to cultivate good character. Our simple one-story house wasn't soundproof. I sat in my room, my hand writing, but my ears perked up, listening to the conversations outside. Even as a child, I recognized that when people were poor, life brought so many problems, so many problems. A couple might start their marriage deeply in love, but after a while, life's problems would emerge. And most of those problems stemmed from money. They'd start arguing. At first, they'd argue in the bedroom, not wanting their children to hear. Then, their voices would get louder. And eventually, they'd argue right in front of their children. Sometimes, they even got angry when their child saw them arguing but didn't know where to hide. I grew up in a small neighborhood with such complicated circumstances, surrounded by these stories. That's why, if you look at my handwriting now, I practiced calligraphy for 10 years, for so many years, but my handwriting isn't beautiful. It's because my heart wasn't at peace, everyone. I practiced writing, but I kept listening to the stories outside. Adults around me back then often said my face looked as withered as an eggplant. Do you know those kids who look shriveled up and seem to have seen through the harsh realities of the world? That was me. Back then, I heard too many heartbreaking stories of marriage, money troubles, the daily struggle for food and necessities, siblings at odds because of money, people becoming bitter and harsh with each other over money. In short, all problems seemed to stem from money. It made me think that if people didn't have money, life would be incredibly difficult. Then, when I finished elementary school and went to middle school in 6th grade, a boy liked me and confessed his feelings. But back then, girls developed earlier than boys, so the girls already looked like young women while the boys still looked very childish. Of course, I didn't say yes. So, in the 2nd semester of that year, he gave me a library card. He said, "I'm going back to my hometown soon, so here's my library card for you. I notice you often borrow books from the other girls in class to read." Actually, they were romance novels, everyone. Back then, there was no internet to read romance novels online. If you wanted to read them, you borrowed books and passed them around. He paid for my library membership for 4 full years and said, "Consider this our last gift." That boy was one of my saviors on my path to knowledge. That library card gave me access to the district library. And in the district library, besides romance novels, there were many other types of books. At that time, I was only focused on how to make money, how to get rich. I knew I didn't have any capital or business to start now, but I thought, oh, I'm only 12. If I start absorbing knowledge about getting rich now, by the time I'm older, I'll have a wealth of knowledge, and I'll run faster than others because I started early. So, back then, whenever I went to the library, I'd pick up any book that had the words poor and rich in the title. I still remember reading a book about the poor, the very first one I picked up at that library. It said that poor people have patchwork thinking and lack a long-term vision. Therefore, everything they do is temporary, without a long-term plan, which keeps them poor. I read the first page, and it said that, so I didn't even bother to read the rest. Don't you feel that sense of wounded pride? It was like, my pride was so hurt, I couldn't read anymore, I just closed the book. At that moment, I felt so angry. I just thought, what does this author know? Do they know that poor people can't have a long-term vision? Because the struggle for survival, just getting through each day, is already a huge problem for them. Poor people often encounter problems, simply because when problems arise, they can't use money to solve them. They're not like the rich. Rich people get sick, rich people have things break down. Rich people can use money to fix things, but poor people can't. Poor people lack the capacity to resist risks. Once misfortune finds them, they'll crumble. Another thing is that poor people get sick more often because they don't have money for health care. Their financial capacity is only enough to sustain their lives. So where would they get the money for health care, right? And health is a person's most valuable asset. That book also said that poor people aren't diligent. I know better than anyone that poor people are more diligent than anyone. They work tirelessly, but it's only because they don't have access to much knowledge. They don't have much understanding. And when they lack understanding, they won't know about policies that benefit them. They won't know about opportunities that benefit them. From then on, I only read books with the word rich in them. Any book with the word poor, I wouldn't read it anymore. I felt too wounded. When I was in elementary school, I didn't notice the disparity between rich and poor in a classroom. Because back then, kids just went to school, came home, and played innocently. What did they know? But when I got to middle school, girls started to doll themselves up. Social media started to become popular, so people could shop online, buy lipstick, buy shoes. Oh, everyone around me is so rich. How do they have money for all these things? I don't. It further intensified the inferiority complex within me that I was a poor person. My entire childhood, from small to big, I always thought I was poor. So back then, I compensated for that lack of confidence by trying to be a good student. I might be poorer than you guys, but I have to be the best student. And indeed, in my little well, I saw the sky as a circle, everyone. And truly, in my well, I was number 1. I thought the world out there was just like that. I was the best student in the world. All the adults around me said that the best students would change their future and make money, right? So, back then, I had a burning desire to change the world. I had a burning desire to open a company, create jobs, and help the poor. I wouldn't let poor people be called poor anymore. Everyone would be happy together. In short, I was full of fervent ambition for life. Then I went to high school. I got into a specialized high school, and I think my life started to know the taste of failure from then on, and ever since. When I attended the first classes with my classmates and went to extra classes with students from other specialized subjects, I realized there were truly differences between people. Everyone around me was an academic prodigy. Like, I'd try my absolute hardest, study until my nose bled, and only get an 8. But some people would get a 10, simply because 10 was the maximum score. At that point, I got discouraged and just let myself drift. I thought, effort doesn't necessarily guarantee success, but not trying is certainly easier. And I knew that the National Gifted Student Competition, that battle wasn't for me. I thought, if they can do it, let them do it. Why should I bother? And if they're that good and still can't do it, how can I? People better than me are still striving, so why should I strive anymore? Better to just rest. I thought like that many times. There are many different me's inside me, and that lazy me wanted to conserve energy. And I think the fiercest battle for me was how the passionate me inside could fight against that lazy me. And that battle I lost, At that time, I thought, okay, I'm not going to pursue the path of the National Gifted Student Competition anymore. I'll just focus on doing well in 3 subjects for the university entrance exam. I looked at the top universities and their required scores, and I studied just enough to meet those. I still remember the adults around me often telling stories like, hey, this guy, this girl, they were terrible students back in the day, but they had a way with words, very glib. They'll succeed easily in society. What did they know about studying back then? So, a glimmer of hope sparked within me. Now, I need to be more articulate, more dynamic, and build more relationships. So, from then on, I let my studies slide, but I participated in many activities. A quick note, if any young listener is hearing this part, don't follow my example, because later I deeply regretted it. Study properly, don't be like me. Even if your university entrance exam scores are okay, if your overall GPA is low, you'll miss out on several opportunities. So, try hard, study diligently, okay? Don't be like me. I joined the school's music club, and I became the class vice president of culture and sports. At our school, each year, the 3 grades within a specialized subject would organize extracurricular activities together. Like there would be extracurriculars for math majors, physics majors, chemistry majors, English majors, and so on. So, you can roughly understand that the VP of Culture and Sports is like the event director. So, for any event, I had to step up and organize it. These extracurricular activities, November 20th for teachers, then October 26th for camping or a food festival or whatever. In short, for any issue related to organizing cultural and spiritual activities, the VP of Culture and Sports would be involved. Don't you think I was amazing? A little girl from the countryside, but extremely dynamic. Sounds rosy, right? But no, that very thing made me want to cry rivers for 3 years, because I realized I had no leadership ability. If it weren't for the love and help of my classmates and seniors, I would never have been able to organize those big extracurricular activities and events. Truly, I'm not being humble. I genuinely lack the ability to manage people, to coordinate. In short, my being the VP of Culture and Sports and joining the music club was a disaster for others. But that was also a blessing for me because it gave me the opportunity to try many things. I got to try if I had event organizing skills. I had the chance to try if I could be a singer. And here's something wonderful. When organizing extracurricular activities, I was the MC, and after doing it many times, I discovered, oh, I have MC skills. Besides that, when organizing those extracurricular activities, which included plays, dancing, singing, games, and chuan, propaganda information sharing, the VP of Culture and Sports would be the one to come up with those contents. And through the extracurriculars I organized, I discovered, oh, I can also write scripts. I could tell incredibly good stories, and everyone was always so, wow, with the content I created. After that, I took a gap year, and during that gap year, I had more opportunities to hone my MC skills. So, in my first year of university, I was already able to become a professional MC. Honestly, for a girl from a remote small province moving to Hanoi, it would be very difficult to get the chance to host a big event. But luckily for me, during my gap year, I met this older sister. She used to be an MC, but later, when she started working, she transitioned into event management. And since she organized events, she would call me to be the MC. A few days before my first time hosting a big event in Hanoi, I didn't have a nice dress, so she took me to rent one because I didn't have money to buy those sparkly, voluminous dresses. You had to rent them. After renting it, she took me to a coffee shop. Back then, a cup of coffee was almost 50,000 VND. I thought, wow, how can people drink a 50,000 VND coffee? And she even treated me. I thought, wow, when will I be able to earn enough money to drink a 50,000 VND coffee? I was so amazed. Then when we sat down to talk, she told me, you need to remember these things carefully. You're now entering society, not just a normal first-year university student. Because when you work with my team, these big events will have many people from different social statuses. There will be famous celebrities and singers, big sponsors, team members from production, all sorts of people of all ages and genders. But you're still too young. You're only 18 or 19. So there will be things you're vague about, you won't be as savvy as adults. So I want to tell you, once you step out into society, if you're not careful, you'll be preyed upon by men. Apologies to any male listeners if this offends you. She was just warning me. What she meant wasn't that all men out there are bad. But when you work in an environment with such diversity, with so many different types of people, you have to be careful. Especially with people of the opposite sex, you need to be extra cautious. So later, when I worked as an MC, a big event like that would pay several million VND. Oh my God, everyone, you wouldn't believe it. When I received the envelope of money after my first hosting gig, all I wanted was to get the money and rush home on the bus to cry. I cried so loudly on the bus because it was the first time in my life I had held such a large sum of money that I earned myself. I just cried and cried and cried. I said, oh my God, I never thought there would be a time in my life when I could earn so much money. And it was money earned from my passion. I was so happy, everyone. Incredibly happy. So later, after more hosting gigs, I was paid similar amounts. Gradually, I got used to that feeling and realized, oh, I'm in a different position now. I'm starting to earn money now. Then, the event that my mentor and I didn't expect arrived. A man offered to make me his girlfriend and financially support me. Maybe he genuinely liked me, or maybe not, I don't know, but I felt, why, if this person likes me, don't they court me normally? Why do they use money to try and fast-track it? At that time, I was only 1.5 meters tall, but my ego was 3 meters tall, incredibly high. And I thought, if I accepted money to be in a relationship with this person, no matter how much it was, I would be seeing myself as merchandise. Because merchandise can be bought with money. But I was priceless. I was something wonderful and beautiful from my parents. My parents never stopped telling me how wonderful, how precious I was. So, the money that person offered me, it might have been a lot, it might have been super significant for a student, but it was nothing compared to my worth. I rejected the offer. But afterward, I kept thinking about the saying, raise sons in hardship, daughters in silk and satin. So that later, when this daughter grows up and goes out into society, she won't be tempted by fleeting luxuries. I thought, well, I wasn't raised in silk and satin and I always felt poor, so I had a huge desire to earn money. But I think, more than anything, I also had a super high ego. An ego that was, at times, a bit much. So of course, I wouldn't accept that situation, that predicament. Back then, people often talked about the sugar baby phenomenon, everyone. And suddenly, I understood why most sugar babies would be students. Because when a girl from a small countryside area comes to the city and sees everything sparkling, everything beautiful, but she can't afford it, and she can't earn money like older working women. That girl has to face the dilemma of reconciling her desires with her ability to fulfill them. So, there's a shortcut where someone comes and says, be my girlfriend, and I'll give you money. Which is quite tempting, isn't it? Then I asked myself a question. If you weren't an MC, if you weren't earning a decent amount of money, would you be tempted by this money? Because I am someone with a lot of curiosity about life. I needed money to fund those curiosities, but my family couldn't provide much, just the basic necessities. So anything beyond those basic needs, I had to earn myself. So, at that moment, I just thought, if I didn't have money, would I waver before this man's offer? Before that, I had already strived to earn money. I already had a strong desire to be rich, right? So after that, I had an even stronger desire to be rich. I was even more passionate about getting rich, because I thought, if I don't have money, it will be hard to be immune to temptations. I took on more shows, even traveling to other provinces like Bac Giang, Bac Ninh, the provinces surrounding Hanoi. Suddenly, the pandemic hit and all activities shut down. My studies at university also moved online, and I went home. But at that time, I already had a decent amount of savings. A few months before the pandemic ended, that was when the Vietnamese stock market boomed, skyrocketing. Because of the pandemic, the government needed to inject money into the economy to stimulate it. Of course, I would never miss out on such opportunities to get rich. I also joined the stock market. When the market is going up, when it's in an uptrend, anyone who invests will win. Few people lose money, almost everyone profits. But back then, I didn't know. I just thought I was smart, I thought I was better than others. From my initial capital, I earned a lot of profit. I had over 100 million in my hands, and I felt so proud of myself. My friends around me saw me earning money and admired me. Even my friends who studied finance praised me profusely. They said, "Wow, you really were good at natural sciences back then. Now you analyze stocks, read financial reports and technical analysis, and you're getting high profits." And I made quite a bit of money. At that point, greed started to surge within me. Turns out I was born to do this. Then I made an even bolder decision. I borrowed money from my friends to invest. And back then, I was incredibly foolish, telling my friends that if there were losses, I would bear them, but if there were profits, I would split them with them. And many people lent me money. In the beginning, I really did make a lot of profit. When we went back to school after the pandemic ended, I lived like a queen, everyone. I could eat, play, and spend money lavishly without thinking. I earned a lot of money every month. I even thought, hey, maybe I should do this full-time now. I don't even need to be an MC anymore. Because first, being an MC was hard work. Second, the money I earned wasn't as much as from the stock market. Now, telling this story, I just find it funny. And do you know what else happened back then? I acted as if I had opened a company, started a fund, and my friends were my shareholders. And at the end of each month, when I paid them their share of the profits, I would usually treat them to a hot pot meal and then give them the money. And then I started dressing more formally, wearing blazers and such. Dressing like a businesswoman, everyone, putting on the air of a successful woman. I don't know why I could be like that back then. And then what had to happen happened, and the stock market started to go down. Actually, stock market investing is an activity where you can observe your own psychology and the psychology of the crowd very well. At that time, the market started to decline, but I had put all my money, all the money I borrowed from my friends, into the market. Now, with such a sharp drop, I didn't want to sell. People would say it's going down, but it wouldn't be a straight drop. It would kind of go down for a few days, then go up for a day to give people hope, so they would buy in again, or there's a term for it, to dump on their heads, to lure people into buying before another drop. Since selling at that point would mean too much loss, I just hoped it would go back up. I didn't sell. I just waited and waited and waited. My friends were just students. They hadn't earned money yet. The money they lent me was all money their parents gave them for something else. But because of the pandemic and quarantine, they didn't need to spend that money yet, so they had a temporary surplus to lend me. But after the pandemic ended, they would need that money to continue their activities, to continue their lives, so they would ask me for it back. At that time, another painful lesson I learned was that no matter who I borrowed money from, I must always confirm the repayment deadline with them. Because if I happen to borrow a sum of money, and the person asks for it back precisely when I'm at my lowest, hitting rock bottom, then everything becomes even more frantic, even more terrible. Better not to borrow it in the first place. In the midst of the market's deepest decline, I knew there would be some recovery bounces later. But I still had to sell my losses to pay back my friends. And when I sold and paid my friends back, I lost all my savings, all the money I had earned in the previous years. And I still owed my friends an additional amount. And then followed the horrifying chain of anxiety-ridden days, as I told everyone in the podcast, anxiety disorder and the story of death. I mean, just imagine, you're not making any more money, but you might wake up one morning completely unprepared to a text message saying, "Can you pay me back today?" These things were completely reasonable. I don't blame my friends, I only blame myself for putting myself in such a situation. Then, after many struggles, I managed to borrow a large sum of money from the bank and used that money to pay back all my friends. The debt remained the same. It didn't change. I even had to pay interest. But each month, I would have a fixed repayment schedule. This was different from someone suddenly texting me demanding money and me not being able to manage it in time. It was like I had more control over my repayment plan. After that, as I told everyone before, I faced problems with anxiety disorder. I was exhausted, but of course, at that time, I didn't know I had an anxiety disorder. And naturally, in that state, I couldn't work as an MC again. Then, after a period of struggling and searching, a stroke of luck came my way. There was a tutoring program for students preparing for specialized high school entrance exams. At that time, I worked as a tutor for specialized physics. One 1.5-hour tutoring session would pay 400,000 VND. Actually, these students already had teachers for the specialized curriculum and exam prep, but they needed someone at home to help with homework and provide individual lessons, explaining anything they didn't understand. It was also rainy season in Hanoi back then. Some days I'd go to tutor, and it would be pouring, the rain washing over my face. I didn't know if I was crying or if it was just the rainwater on my face anymore, because at that time I felt such a deep hatred for myself. I felt that all the misfortunes that came into my life were self-inflicted. The fact that I borrowed money and ended up in debt was my own doing. No one else harmed me. It was entirely my fault. I hated myself so much then. And even though I hated myself, I also resented life. I still felt, why is life so unfair to me? I work so hard all month, but at the end of the month I just pay off debt, and I have nothing left over. I always have to live frugally, always have to work tirelessly. At that time, I resented life and was angry at myself. At that point, I also understood why people always want to blame others. Because taking responsibility for your own mistakes is not easy at all. If I blame someone else, I can resent that person. And when I resent someone else, I only think of them and feel uncomfortable occasionally. But if I resent myself, I have to live 24 hours a day with the person I hate. I always have to face myself, always live with that self-hatred, and it's extremely unpleasant. That period was truly a very difficult time for me. And if I could go back to that time, I wish I would have treated myself more gently. I wish I hadn't treated myself so badly. When the child within me tried something new, failed, and was in its deepest pain, most tormented, needing me most, needing the support of the only adult it trusted and could rely on, I hated it, I tormented it, I was cruel. When I needed myself most, I hated myself. Now, every time I think back, I deeply regret that time. With the difficulties I had to go through, I should have loved myself more, been gentler with myself. But all I did was hate myself for putting myself in that situation. From my home to that wealthy neighborhood was 10 kilometers. Every time I rode in the car, I would remember the book I read as a child in the district library. It said that poor people have patchwork thinking, lack a comprehensive vision, and only do things temporarily, haphazardly. And I saw that, oh, that's exactly me. I let my temporary victory make me think I was smart. Then I borrowed an amount of money beyond my means to invest and pushed myself into this situation. That's when I thought I was truly someone without a solid foundation of thinking, and everything was so disjointed. Back then, my life seemed so bleak, everyone. After a few months of tutoring, when that teacher saw how pathetic I was, she introduced me to tutor for children from other families in the neighborhood, also for specialized physics. So, I took on a few more classes, and I'm truly grateful to that teacher. Because of her, after a few months, my debt burden eased. It lessened a bit. And when I had paid down some of my debt, I knew I didn't want to be a teacher for life. I didn't want to be a tutor for life. One short-sighted period was enough for me. Now I needed a longer-term vision. This tutoring job gave me financial stability, but it didn't give me professional expertise. And by the time I finished paying off my debt and graduated, all my friends around me would already have work experience. I would have nothing? No, that couldn't happen. So, I tried to rearrange my schedule and started an internship. My life was so busy back then. Mornings were for studying, afternoons for work, and evenings from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. were for tutoring. At that time, working at this company, I met a very good boss. She mentored me and gave me working principles that I still apply today. I had applied for a content position. There was a task she gave me, and when I finished it, she told me, "You are a very creative and capable person. If you weren't in survival mode, you would go very far, very quickly." Survival mode means being in a state of just trying to survive. What does that mean? Your capacity in life is only enough to sustain yourself, and that takes up so much space in your life and your mind that you don't have the capacity to do things well anymore. So she scheduled a meeting with me. She was truly so kind, everyone. She scheduled a meeting with me and asked, "Why do you always look so sad, and why do you seem so timid in front of crowds?" Someone who used to confidently be an MC, but now seeing a crowd makes me scared and timid, always looking sad. Whereas before, everyone always called me radiant, always smiling, full of energy, sometimes even excessively. And I had become such a person. When she asked me, I cried. I cried and told her about everything I was doing. I had to tutor, and tutoring for specialized entrance exams wasn't easy. Even though I had taken specialized exams before, it had been years, and I didn't remember. So now I had to study again to solve specialized problems to teach my students. And I still had to go to university. Most importantly, I was always pressured about having to pay that amount of money each month. So everything weighed heavily on me, and I also told her about my anxiety disorder. Then she said something to me that I'll never forget. She told me, "You might be feeling very bad right now and think you'll never overcome it, that nothing good will ever happen in your life again. But trust me, life is very long and the human capacity for healing is very strong. What's hurting you now will pass, so just keep trying your best, and I will also try my best to guide you. Because I know you are a very capable person, you just need enough guidance and space to grow." I truly think I've met too many good people in my life, so many good people. Along with working, I still tutored every day. At the company after work, people would occasionally go bonding, drinking, or having coffee together. I never had time for those things. I didn't even have time for dinner. I'd finish work at 5:30, deal with traffic, and by the time I got to a student's house, it might be past 6 without having eaten anything. I'd just dive into teaching because I had to teach 2 sessions in one evening. So the parent, she was an elder, but I usually called her sister. Then, knew I was from the same hometown, Ha Tin, because I had to show my ID card for verification before tutoring. So she took pity on me. I didn't explicitly tell her about my debt or my illness or anything. But she said, "You always look so busy and rushed. I know you must have some problems in life." Every time I came to tutor, she would tell me, "You can start teaching 30 minutes later and have dinner with the family." Back then, I don't know why, but when you're poor, you don't feel ashamed when people invite you for dinner, you know? I really did eat dinner there. I really did, everyone. I ate dinner there for several months, every time I came to tutor. Gradually, I became closer to that parent. So, on the only afternoon off I had each week, the parent called me to go for coffee and talk. That day, she confided a lot in me and she cried. Now, this sounds a bit guilty to say, but for some reason, when I saw her cry, I felt somewhat comforted. Because I realized that ever since I was born, I had always thought that money would solve all problems, and if I had money, I would feel secure, I wouldn't have to live in circumstances I didn't want. But now, as I stepped into the world of the rich, interacted with them, and heard their stories, I knew that money could solve many problems, but not all problems. And when people have money, they might even worry more, feel more insecure. This woman, even though she was incredibly rich, unbelievably rich, both husband and wife were very wealthy, it was because she grew up with a difficult childhood and had many traumas related to money, to insecurity. So, when she actually became rich, she never felt enough, she never felt secure about the money she had. She even suffered from anxiety disorder, but a different kind of anxiety than mine. But generally, it was all about money. That's when I realized how ironic life is. People without money, like me, worry. People with an abundance of money also worry. The thought that when I earn money, I will feel stable, feel no more insecurity, feel content, that's not true. If I don't feel content, I will never truly feel secure. I will only feel secure when I know what enough is. So then, like all the stories I've told you on this podcast, when I worked at the company, I was guided by my boss, gained experience, and built my channel. When I decided to build my channel, I became popular very quickly. Back then, people in my industry all said that if I had a proper plan, I could even become a top influencer. Of course, it required a proper plan, not just happening by chance. But at that time, for some reason, I felt that fame came to me too quickly, and I saw it as no different from how money came to me quickly when I invested in stocks. And after that fall, I became very wary of achievements that came too quickly. I understood that when I didn't have enough capacity but received big achievements, big rewards, I wouldn't be able to handle them, I wouldn't be able to manage them, I wouldn't be able to solve problems once they arose. So I deliberately reined in my popularity at that time. If you've listened to my 2022 podcast, I said I wanted to be famous for my content, not my image. I wanted more people to listen to my podcast, but I didn't feel the need to show my face. I didn't need to be widely recognized. So back then, I never showed my face. I only filmed random scenery, because I wanted things to slow down. I wanted my abilities to align with the results, not just big results with nothing substantial inside me. At this point, I don't think I'm overly talented, but years of working in the field have helped me understand what I'm doing better. I have more specialized knowledge. I can even confidently open classes now. I can confidently take on consulting projects, meaning I'm not a person without inner strength or substance like before. And I think now, truthfully, my golden age of becoming popular has passed. There's a term called rising star. It only applies when you're becoming known quickly and widely. But now I'm just maintaining. Not overly famous, and not every video goes viral like before. So now, showing my face doesn't really make me famous. But perhaps I've accepted that I have enough capability for my current achievements. I deserve these things. That's why I started showing my face, started stepping more into content creation, more than before. I think I've always been a child with a huge desire for money. But after many slaps from life, I think I need more stability. And my goal now isn't to be the richest person, to have the nicest car, the biggest house, but I want more peace of mind. A strong nervous system, a stable psychological state, not overly anxious, and to be able to live happily with the people I love, doing the things I enjoy, that's more than enough. Perhaps after a turbulent journey with a lot of ups and downs regarding money, I realized that at this point, I don't need to be super rich anymore. When I was little, I thought I would definitely be rich. But now I think I don't need to be super rich anymore. Because getting rich isn't easy. To get rich, you either have to be incredibly talented, and I've known since high school that I'm not incredibly talented. Or, if not rich, you have to work extremely hard, sacrifice a lot, exchange a lot, and I'm not someone who dares to make such sacrifices. There are many things in life that I cherish and wouldn't dare to exchange. Even if I were rich, I would still have many problems to face. Perhaps even more problems than when I wasn't rich, and I know what people have to go through, what they have to sacrifice. Because that woman told me. So after all, I think, now I don't need to be rich anymore. I just need to have stable finances, to be able to do what I want, to be able to take care of the people around me, and I strive to earn money so that I don't have to live in circumstances I don't want. To go to the places I want to go, to see more of the world, to experience more of life. Well, I think today's episode has been very long. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye and see you next time.